Do you remember what you were doing on March 23rd, 2016 at 11:13 a.m.? You sure? Isn't it interesting how there are certain moments in time that literally make it stand still? Moments that become so embedded in the fabric of who we are that we never forget them. For me, one of those moments was March 23rd, 2016 at 11:13 a.m. That's when the phone rang. And the voice on the other end of the line was clear, it was direct, and it was urgent. Deana, this is cancer. And it's a very aggressive case. And you need to put together a medical team immediately. If you've ever experienced this type of diagnosis or this type of call before, you know how absolutely terrifying it can be. But on that day for me, there were two things that really knocked the wind out of me. One, I was only 34 years old and had no family history of breast cancer. And two, I was pregnant. Imagine. The day of my diagnosis, I was leading an amazingly, wonderfully chaotic life. I already had two small boys. My husband was an active duty military service member. We owned our own home. We had a rental property. We'd even invested in a franchise just a few months before my diagnosis. And to top it off, I was leading a tech sales team at the time. We were a little busy, but I loved our wonderfully chaotic life because it gave me the opportunity to show that I could win. And with one phone call, just one, my confidence was completely shaken. Because for the first time ever in my life, I faced a situation that I could not manage my way out of. For me, the gap came in the form of a breast cancer diagnosis. But for you, it might look like something different. Maybe it is the first time that you are navigating an adult crisis without the support of a parent or a guardian. Maybe it's an unexpected job loss. These are moments that I refer to as gap moments. And entrepreneurs, we know these moments well because these are moments that often make us question why we ever started a business in the first place. But today, I want us to lean into the idea that the gap is actually a gift. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, being an entrepreneur was the furthest thing from my mind. You see, I was in college at the same time that Mark Zuckerberg was building Facebook. And if he would have stayed on at Harvard, he and I would have actually graduated from college the same year, right smack dab into what we now know as the dot-com boom. During that time, it seemed like anybody who was everybody was starting a brand new business. But me, it couldn't have been the furthest thing from my mind. I actually decided to jump into a career in sales. And to my surprise, I thrived there. There's something about being able to combine human connection with hard work that made me super successful. And for many entrepreneurs, that's how it starts. Not with a polished business plan or millions of dollars in seed funding, but it actually starts by doing the thing that we are really good at, or the thing that we love enough to get really good at. But the gap, The gap has a way of creating and taking away the illusion that we may have of success. Because when it comes to being an entrepreneur, it doesn't just come down to endurance. It doesn't just come down to doing the right thing every day. It requires a rewiring of your mindset to realize that the gap doesn't just take from us. The gap actually gifts us something back. 3 things, in fact. And those 3 things spell something really special. GAP. The first gift that the gap gives us is grit. During my breast cancer journey, there were many days when I did not see a path forward. But because I don't lose, I knew that I had to take it one moment, one step, one day at a time. This shows up for entrepreneurs too. Sometimes maybe it's the launch that falls flat. Sometimes it might be the quarter where the numbers don't add up. And there's research behind this. Kaufman Foundation tells us that entrepreneurs who succeed long-term are not the ones who avoid failure, but they are the ones who recover from it. Shifting that mindset from thinking about what you don't have to what you do have, that is what makes the difference, because the gap is the gift. The second gift that the gap gives us is allies. During my cancer journey, we had to engage allies at every point in turn, from my medical team to the people who were going to help and support us with our boys, and even to make sure that my husband had a support system. The interesting thing about allies, though, is that entrepreneurs are the least likely people to ask for help. Can you imagine? Running a whole business and not asking for help. But the gap has a way of helping us realize that we can't do it alone. And there's research behind this too. Harvard Business Review tells us that collaborative leaders, those who lean into their networks and their allies, they are 4.5 times more likely to lead high-performing teams. Why? Because the gap is truly the gift. And the third gift that the gap gives us is perspective. Sometimes the gap will narrow our vision to be super minute, and that's actually a gift, because sometimes all we can see is the next step, or the next project, or the next 3 months. We don't always see the full staircase, but one step in front of another is just enough. And as you might imagine, there's research behind this too. So McKinsey tells us that when we are looking at entrepreneurship and we are looking at perspective, that the types of teams who lean into creating opportunities to create clarity more consistently and lean into flexible decision-making, those are the ones who outperform their peers by 30%. Why? Because the gap really is the gift. So yes, the gap can be extremely uncomfortable. It could actually even be terrifying. But at the end of the day, leaning into our gaps is really the best thing that we can do in order to achieve success. How do we know this? CB Insights tells us that 70% of startups fail. And they don't fail because the product is bad. They fail because of gaps. Gaps in leadership, gaps in collaboration, and gaps in perspective. Now imagine what would happen if instead of seeing those gaps as negative things, that we saw them as openings. Openings for grit to take hold. Openings for allies to step in. And openings to gain new perspective. Why? Because the gap really is the gift. You know, we all experience the gap in so many different ways. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to know what the gap feels like. Maybe it's the first time that you're part of a group project where everyone doesn't pull their weight. Maybe it's the first time that you hear no for a job interview. Whatever it may be, understand that nothing that you are experiencing hasn't been experienced by others before. And that when we lean into these gaps, they take root to create growth. Because failure is part of the gap. But how you identify failure and how you look at failure determines how successful you can be. Because you can determine that failure is final, or you can use it as fuel. So we're on a college campus today, and that's not lost on me. Because students, you experience the gap every day. The gap of becoming. The difference between the major that you chose and what you'll end up doing after graduation. The difference between who you are today and who you might choose to be tomorrow. You know, it can become very easy to believe that you should have it all together. But that is not realistic. It really isn't. Because at the end of the day, we all have gaps. So whether you decide that you are going to start a company or join a company after graduation, or whatever it is that you decide that you are going to do, remember, right now, the gift really is the gap that you are in. You know, when I received that diagnosis on March 23rd, 2016 at 11:13 a.m., I remember the fear, I remember the frustration, but what I really remember most is what happened afterwards. What I remember most is what happened when I allowed the gap in. And that's something that we can all take part in, and that's something that we can all participate in, because the gap really and truly is the gift. So, the next time that you find yourself in a situation where there is a gap, don't run away from it. Embrace it. Because that moment that you are so fearful of is likely the moment that is going to shape you the most. And that is not just a business strategy. That's not just a story. That is an idea worth spreading. Because the gap really is the gift. Thank you.